little of my background. So I was, my family has been military. I'm like fourth generation military. My great-grandfathers, my grandfathers, my dad, my uncle, I've served, my brother is retired military, my brother-in-law is in the Air Force. So we come from a family of military. It's kind of what we've known growing up. It's become what we've it's become almost, I don't want to say in our blood, but it kind of is. But it's more than just military. I think if you talk to my brother, if you talk to my dad, and for myself, it's about serving. It's about serving the people of the United States. It's about serving our ideas, our beliefs as a country, as a nation, and defending those. So where do, we talked a little bit about where do our freedoms come from? Anybody know? How do we know what's given to us as far as freedoms?
You get educated.
That is exactly, it's freedom. Everybody know the Bill of Rights? What document? What document does our freedoms originate from? Good.
Yeah, there you go.
Constitution, absolutely. And so that is kind of what drives, for me, my purpose of serving in the military was to defend those freedoms for not only the people of the United States, for y'all, is to act as an example to the rest of the world that doesn't have those freedoms. There are a lot of countries in the world that don't have a democracy, that don't have the freedoms that we enjoy here. And so a lot of the time, I spent in the military was allowing that, is showing that as an example and trying to help countries that wanted freedom to gain that freedom. So I went to college. I went to Texas Tech. Graduated way back 1990, and then went right into the Army after that. So the Army is kind of a little bit different. I studied communications. I studied information systems, computers, networks in the Army. And the Army said, "That's great. We're going to teach you how to lead tank platoons. We're going to teach you how to shoot a tank, drive it, maneuver on it, and lead tanks to fight in wars." So, they don't train that at the university. So don't look and see if there's an armor class that you can take. But so they end up training you to begin with. And so that's what I did for 6 or 7 months. Going into the Army. So one thing I put up here, I said, why I do what I do. So when you join the military, you take what's called an oath of office. And so this is the oath of office for the officers who join once you graduate from college. So I broke it down a little bit, and this is what you swear when you go into it. So when I first read it, it was kind of like, okay, I understand it, but it wasn't until I was actually serving that I really understood what it meant. So who can read that? Who can read the first line there? Go ahead.
I do solemnly swear.
Oop, lost it. There we go. That was good timing. There we go.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Okay, great. So what I was talking about earlier about freedoms and where do our freedoms come from? It comes from the Constitution. Now, what's interesting to me is, do you see anything that says, "I swear allegiance to the president," or "I swear allegiance to the Congress," or "I swear allegiance to the governor"? No, because we don't swear allegiance to a person. In the military, we don't swear that allegiance to somebody. We swear allegiance to what the Constitution stands for. It's defending those freedoms that the Constitution provides. And so part of that oath is, I'll defend against any enemies, foreign and domestic. That means U.S., people in the United States or people outside the United States. It doesn't matter if it's a threat against the Constitution. That's what the military is there for. Okay, we'll skip down. Let's read the last line. Who can read that? Good.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
Okay, so for me, so as my career kind of went along, is you don't really realize it when you first get in the military what that really means. Like, my office, I don't have an office. I'm just, I'm in a classroom. I'm working with some people. But as you start to spend more time in the military, the office is what I am, what I do as a person, as a profession. A lot of people think, you go into the military and it's just, they tell you where to go, you go shoot guns, you go run around a lot, and that's all you do. But it's a lot more than that. And I've gone, I've been to, I've got my master's. I've been to 6 or 7 different schools. They train you not only in how to do things, but they train you intellectually. And so you attend a lot of different schools. There are some of my friends who've been to, have been to Harvard, to Georgetown to attend schools. So it's not just physical stuff. It's not just running around doing things. Because the Army looks for leaders that are smart, and we train them really well in the intellectual side of the world. Because it takes more than just someone who can shoot a gun to lead the Army. You got to understand it. So we have some very, very smart people who do that. And that goes into that, the well and faithfully discharge the duties of that office. Because it's not just about the one soldier shooting it. It's about the general, the 4-star general who's leading the whole entire Army. He has to do it. He has to understand it and do it well. Okay, talk about Army values. And does everybody know what an acronym is? Okay, the Army loves acronyms. We love, everything's an acronym. MRE, everybody know what MRE, ever heard of MREs? You know what it stands for? Meal ready to eat. So we love acronyms. So we took the Army values and made it into an acronym. And I won't go over all of it, but the Army not only does an oath, but these values these are the things as a soldier, as the military that we try to show people that this is what we're all about. So you got loyalty. Everybody, loyalty, pretty straightforward. Dedication, responsibility, selfless service. That's probably one of the biggest ones for us. Selfless service. Who can explain? What do you think selfless service means?
Means what if in battle, even if you're about to be killed, you still will attempt to fight.
Yeah, no, that's a good example, and not only in wartime, but in peacetime as well. Is knowing that, hey, look, I've got, for me, an example is I've got soldiers who, have babies at home, but they have to do something tonight. Well, I'm going to do it for them. I'm going to let them go home so they can be with their wife and their newborn, and I'll take care of that. I don't get anything out of it, but I'm helping somebody else out. So that, for us, for the military, we do that not only for ourselves, but when we go to Iraq, we go to Afghanistan, we're not just going to fight wars, we're going to help people. We're going to serve and try to build up those governments. Whoops. I got you.
Lost.
You got it? There we go. Okay. So, I'm sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, kind of a comment. You know how you read stories about people who are traumatized in war and stuff? Do you have any traumatizing experiences?
I mean, I have been in some experiences. I think everybody who has gone to war has some level of traumatic experience. Now, some people experience a lot more than I did. I was a fairly senior officer when I deployed to Iraq, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I was not out, kicking in doors and trying to arrest people and shooting at people and people shooting at me on a daily basis. And so for me, it was a little bit more when we took, people did shoot at us and people did shoot rockets and mortars at us. So there are some of those experiences. Some people have experienced a lot more than I ever have. And I can't imagine some of the things. I mean, I know what they've experienced, but until you experience yourself, you really never know what it's gonna be like. So I think everybody, to an extent, has that traumatic experience. It's just a matter of how much you have. Okay, where was it? Okay, selfless service, honor. Honor is a big thing for the military. It's a little bit honor and integrity. Those are things that for the military we build off of. If you can't take me at my word, then I'm no good. You're never going to trust me to do anything. So for the military, it's a matter of we make mistakes. There's no two ways about it. I've made a ton of mistakes in my life, a ton of mistakes in the military, but I owned up to it and said, you know what, I did that wrong. We're going to fix it and do it better. That's what honor, that's what integrity is. It's not trying to blame somebody else or trying to say, well, it wasn't really my fault, kind of things. It's like, something you did, you own up to it, and you just move on. You learn from it and move on to the thing. So that for the military are some big things. And the last one is personal courage. It's just being able to do the right thing at the right time. I'm sure your parents have said the only way to really trust your integrity is if you do the right thing when no one's watching. And it's the same thing, in the military. You shouldn't have someone standing over your shoulder to make sure you do the right thing. You just do it. Okay, any questions about this? Like I said, this all goes back to when I talk about freedoms, and I'll go into the next slide and talk about how some of my experiences have helped not only freedom of the country but freedom in other countries. But this, like I said, this all feeds back into the really base issue of the reason I joined was because I wanted to make sure that the United States and all its citizens would always have the freedoms that we've been given by the Constitution. Okay, so my life in the Army. So like I was telling you, is they don't train you to shoot tanks at Texas Tech or at UT or at A&M. So you have to go to school and learn how to do it. So I initially went to school. I learned all about tanks, how to shoot them, how to fix them, how to refuel them. I also learned about mortars. Everybody know what a mortar is? Right. So everybody see like in the movies, they got those little tubes, and they throw the round in and it shoots off like that. So we learned all about those, and then I went to. You have a question? It's a little bit like that. We call it. It's an indirect. There's direct fire systems and there's indirect. Direct means I'm shooting just like that, straight at somebody. Indirect means I'm shooting like that. So yeah, so that's the mortar is like an indirect fire system. And then I went to scout leaders course, which basically scouts are the people who go out in front of the armies and try to find where the enemy is and what they're doing and everything like that. So that was pretty. I enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. But that's a young man's or young person's career because you spend a lot of time walking and a lot of time running around. So it was fun when I was 23 or 24, but not when I'm 45. Later in my life and my career, I switched over to the Signal Corps. I told you, so I went to school and did information systems and learned about computers and networks. Well, it's later in my life I decided that I wanted to go back and take that skill that I learned in college and apply it on the military side. So I went to that. So they sent me to school for about a year to learn more about how the Army runs networks and how their computer systems work. And so then I've spent the last 10 years kind of doing that, running networks, fixing networks, making sure they run correctly, and doing that. But for some very large organizations, so like when we were in Hawaii, our network expanded throughout all of the Pacific. It was in Hawaii, Alaska, Japan, Korea, some of the smaller islands all over. So we ran a pretty big network. How many of y'all have friends or family that are in the military? Okay, so quite a few. They ever tell you about how many times they moved?
My dad had to move a lot because they would always be like walking or moving to different positions.
Yeah.
And he was like, he said they train you like before, like he'll have all your gear until you are your gear, and then he'll make you run a while to get conditioned for all the moving that you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a big part of the Army is conditioning. So we moved. So I've moved since I've been in the military. I was in the Army for 23 years. I moved 13 times throughout that 23 years. So basically, about every 2 years, ended up moving somewhere new, which can be exciting because you're always going someplace new. But at the same time, can be not so exciting or a little bit stressful if you go someplace you really don't want to be, or you start making really good friends, and all of a sudden you got to move and go somewhere else. Yeah.
Where were all the places you moved to?
So let's see. So I've moved 13 times. So I started, I graduated from Tech. So I went from Tech to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I spent, then from there I went to Germany. So I was in Germany for about 3.5 years. And then I was in Seattle, Washington. Fort Lewis is outside Seattle. Then I went back to Kentucky. Then I went to Fort Hood, Texas, just north of here. Then from Fort Hood to Washington, D.C. I worked at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Then I moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. And then from Shreveport to Fort Gordon, Georgia. From Fort Gordon, Georgia, back to Fort Hood to Hawaii, Hawaii to San Antonio, and finally San Antonio to round off. So a lot of movement.
Have you ever been to White Sands?
Yes, yeah, White Sands Missile Range. Sure have. Oh, thanks. Yep, some time out of Fort Bliss, and those are just moves. Now we have a lot of times where we do what's called temporary duty, where you go someplace for a couple of weeks or up to 90 days or something like that. So I've spent time like what's called the National Training Center out in California. I've been there. I've been to the Joint Training Center in Louisiana. I've been to White Sands out at Fort Bliss. Those are smaller deployments or smaller times that I spent there. So we didn't really live there. We just
Where were you when you were in
in Mannheim, which is it's like close to Heidelberg and Frankfurt, kind of in that area. If you're familiar with it. Okay. Yeah.
Did you ever have to learn a new language?
I learned German. We lived. So when I was in Germany, I actually lived in a German apartment building with Germans. It wasn't just Americans. And so my landlord didn't speak any English, so we had to kind of learn how to talk. If something broke in the apartment, how to tell them what it needed done. So and then you spend a lot of time. You go to they have festivals and carnivals and things like that, and so you just or it's a little bit different. Living in Germany, living in Europe overall is a little bit different because a lot of people live in smaller towns, and so you live in a small town, you have a bakery and you have a butcher and stuff like that, and so you get to know people because everybody goes to the bakery and gets all their baked goods, and everybody goes to the butcher and gets their meats or this. So you get to meet a lot of your neighbors that way and spend time, and so doing that, I started picking up a lot of German. And then, because my wife is a fluent French speaker, I was forced to learn some French as well.
Where were you during the
I'm Yes, yeah. So yes, and so that was kind of one thing that I'm just gonna lead into this last thing, employment. So we talked about this in the last class. So 9/11, I was actually in a office building across the street from the Pentagon for a meeting. And so, of course, when the first attacks happened on the World Trade Center, we didn't really, I mean, it was kind of, I mean, all y'all know about it now is, you know, the reports and shows and stuff like that. But for when it was actually, yeah.
But you don't have to answer this question, but what was it like to see on the news the Twin Towers had been attacked, and then moments later see the Pentagon be attacked?
Alex, that's what he's telling you.
Yeah, that's what
Hold the thought.
I'll tell you.
He's coming.
So we're in the, yeah, so I'll tell you kind of about the day, because, I mean, y'all see it on TV, and it's a little bit kind of like, it's just, you know, you know, from your aspect, it's just like something, it's history. But for, you know, for the teachers and for me who were alive during that time, it's, I mean, it's something I'll never forget where I was and what I was doing when it happened. So that morning, we were at a meeting, and someone came in and said, "Hey, plane hit the World Trade Center," and because a few years ago there had been a bombing at the World Trade Center, and so it's always been one of those a very high visibility target that people, you know, who want to, you know, strike against the United States is something they do. So when we heard that, we weren't really sure. I mean, you're just kind of like, "Oh, that's terrible." Now at the time when we first heard it, we had no idea it was a big airline. You know, an airliner that crashed. We thought maybe it was just a small plane that had hit it, because you don't, at that point, you didn't really think about you know, a big airliner hitting a building. It just didn't happen. It wasn't a, you know, we just immediately thought it was just an accident. You know, something, you know, maybe a little, you know, somebody in a commuter plane, maybe had a heart attack and, you know, passed out and just ran into the building, kind of thing. So we stopped, and we're like, well, we'll go. And then someone, you know, a couple minutes later said, "Hey, I think this is a little bit more serious than what we initially thought." So we all went down to, they had a conference room that had a television, so we're all standing there watching the report. And then we saw the second. So then we saw on TV, saw the second plane hit. The second tower, and we knew at that point, we knew this was not just an accident. It was something else going on. So at this point, everybody, I was trying to think. Yeah, I had a cell phone, so everybody's pulling out their cell phones and trying to call home and say, "Hey, are you seeing what's going on? See what's going on?" And, you know, a couple minutes later, we didn't see it because we were on the far side of the building, but we felt it. We felt the impact of the plane hitting the Pentagon. Now, we didn't know it was a plane. We thought it was just a bomb that had gone off at that point, because it was, I mean, you could feel the building shake when it happened. And then people came running in and said the Pentagon's been attacked. Because then we went to the other side of the building, and you could see the flames and smoke coming up off the Pentagon. Honestly, for me, it was probably one of the most surreal moments. Y'all understand when I say surreal? Just didn't feel real. That this was like, wow, I can't believe this has happened. Because at that point, you know, people are literally streaming out of the Pentagon. We're running out of the building. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. You know, Washington, D.C., now there's reports of, oh, planes are coming to attack Washington, D.C. So has anybody ever been to Washington, D.C. before? Okay. So you know how big it is. But, you know, Washington, D.C. sits kind of like on this, not really an island, but to get there, you have to go across the bridges to get into Washington, D.C. Well, they closed down all the traffic, all cars, traffic, and so people were walking across the bridge to get out of Washington, D.C. because we had no idea what was happening next, anything along those lines. So I ended up walking 4 or 5 miles home, or not quite to home, but they have a train system in Virginia, and so I was able to catch a train back close to where I live. But like I said, it was a surreal moment, and then sitting there that whole day, the whole next day, the next day, reading the reports and all the information. It was one of those, like I said, it's one of those moments, you ask, I asked my dad, he knows exactly where he was when Pearl Harbor was bombed. He knows exactly what he's doing. It's the same thing. I'll never forget, where I was and what we were doing on 9/11. So that started, 9/11 started kind of that chain reaction of a lot of, what y'all consider now, because, we've been in a wartime state for the last 13 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's what y'all become kind of accustomed to, used to, as far as soldiers deploying. So before I get into that, I'll just go over. So when we talk deployments, my first big deployment was to Bosnia. Is anybody familiar with Bosnia? No, it's not really much in the news now, but back in the mid-90s, it was really big news. Anybody? Yeah, a little bit. So anyway, back in the mid-90s, a lot of the old, there used to be the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc in Europe. People that lived under kind of the Soviet Union rule, and then other people that had more freedoms, France, West Germany, and things like that. So as the Soviet Union kind of disbanded, some of these countries started falling apart, or people were saying, hey, we want to be our own country. We don't want to be part of that. And so that's what Bosnia came into. But the people who were ruling Bosnia were like, we don't want you. You're still going to be part of our country. We're not going to let you go. And so they started fighting wars. And so there were some really bad things that happened. I mean, not just people fighting wars, but a lot of innocent people being killed just because of their beliefs. And so the United Nations and the United States said, okay, we want to put an end to this. We want to give people a chance to live their lives, how they want to live their lives, which kind of goes back into that freedom thing we were talking about. Those people wanted freedom from the other country that had oppressed them. And so that's where we kind of came in. So going into Bosnia was our first big, at least for me, my first big deployment where it wasn't just fighting, it wasn't about fighting wars. It was about giving people the opportunity to have the freedoms that we have as U.S. citizens. So we spent 9 months in Bosnia working with people, trying to get them. I mean, this country had been ravaged by war. I mean, buildings, complete cities were blown apart. People used to live in a town, and someone came and said, "You are no longer allowed to live in this town. You have to move out." So they had to move somewhere else. So we're trying to get them back to their home, and they were basically told, someone came to their house at night and said, "Pack your stuff and leave, or we're going to kill you." And so people had to do that. So we're trying to fix that and get people moving back to where they used to live. It's still going on. I mean, we still have people in Bosnia. It's a lot better. It's a lot better than it was 15, now 20 years ago. But like I said, that was my first taste of trying to give people the freedom that they want. And that kind of goes into Iraq. So I did 2 deployments. I did two deployments to Iraq. So I spent about 13 months the first time, and then 12 months the second time there. And again, it wasn't just a war effort. It wasn't just to go in and overthrow the Iraqi government and try to establish, and do that. We wanted to help the Iraqi people. There were people in Iraq who wanted freedom, wanted a democracy instead of, Saddam Hussein at the time was a dictator. So he made all the rules. He told everybody what they could and couldn't do. But there were a lot of the Iraqi people who wanted the freedoms that Americans had. And so not only did we go in to fight the war to help them, but then we try to help establish that during that time. So we brought in, so they had elections, they have freedoms that they used not to have under that dictatorship. And so that was kind of what we've really spent the last 10 or 12 years is trying to build up the infrastructure, the government in Iraq and Afghanistan as well, so these people have freedoms that they really, a lot of people really want, that we kind of maybe take for granted sometimes, but people who don't have it definitely don't take it for granted. So we spent time on the ground, in Iraq, working with the Iraqis on how can we help you? How can we make your life better? What can we do? Projects, and we spent money building dams, putting in electrical systems, water, because not everybody had running water. So we put in, plumbing and everything to buildings and things like that. We spent a lot of money, a lot of effort doing that. So the Army's not just about fighting wars, but it's helping people in other countries achieve what they want to achieve. And in those cases was a level of freedom to be able to do what they want, elect the governors and elect the president that they want to represent them, elect their own Congress, have the freedom to, go to school. In some countries, girls aren't allowed to go to school, and so some of those countries want that freedom. So we help. Those are the kind of things that we try to help. All right. Any questions? Anything about that? I know I kind of went a little bit fast on that, but if you got any questions, I've got some pictures. I'll show you some of the things I've done in the military, and then some of the things, pictures I took while I was in Iraq, and some of my other deployments.
We got about 15 minutes.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we'll start there. That may be a little hard to see. So I told you I started as a tank on tanks. So you can kind of see. So every year, so once a year you have to. These are tanks over there. Kind of hard to see back there. So once a year you have to go qualify. You have to say, you have to prove that you can hit targets, that you can shoot things on your tank. So twice a year, this is in Germany, we would go to a training area that was made for tanks. And so they would, I don't have a picture of it, it's back behind these buildings that have this huge range with these pop-up targets. And so you shoot at these targets to show how good you are. Yeah.
What type of tanks did you drive?
These were M1 tanks, the newest tank that the Army has. So these were really nice. So on a tank that's probably almost as long as this, maybe not quite as long as this classroom. 58 tons, really heavy. But you had a crew in a turret that was about this size right here. So you had 3 people who basically lived, in this area right here. So you had a gunner and a tank commander and a loader who loaded the rounds into the gun tube. And so you lived in a very small space. So you got to know each other very well. You spent a lot of time doing that. We would train. So you spend 24 hours. We spent 7 days, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for like 3 weeks living together on that tank. So you got to know each other really, really well. Sometimes more than you wanted to know. So that's where we started. So this was a huge training area in Germany that we would go to twice a year to do that. Yeah.
Did you ever have to actually use the tanks?
No, I didn't. Now we did in Iraq during the Iraq when they first went into Iraq. We did have tanks in there. Most of the time when I was on tanks, we deployed them. We went places with them, but we never shot them. Because most of the time when I was on tanks was more like peacekeeping operations, stabilization operations. It wasn't so much fighting the war. It wasn't until I went over to the communication side that I deployed in wartime. All right. So then I started out as a tank platoon, and then I moved into a mortar platoon. So that was what I was talking about earlier about the mortar. So this is my mortar platoon back at the same place in Grafenberg, doing our training as well. So we'd shoot rounds out into a big training area and doing that. And so this was And then they tested us. So you did these evaluations. You got evaluated on how well you could do, not only shooting, but on different tasks. The Army says, hey, you have to know how to do this. So I think this was after one of our big tests.
Which one of those
I was trying to find this earlier. I'm not. Yeah, I may be the one taking the picture. Oh no. You know what? That's me right there. It's 22 years ago. So I've changed a little bit since then. Yeah, the rest of them are tired. See, they do a lot. I mean, one thing about being an officer is you're the one leading people and telling them what to do. A lot of these guys, I mean, they're running back and forth between these tracks carrying like 60, 70 pounds worth of equipment, doing stuff like that. So they're pretty tired when this whole thing is over. So they're just ready to go back and go to sleep. So this is in Germany. So one thing about the military is you make some really, really close friends because you're going through and doing the same thing. So in Germany, we played rugby. So most of these guys were guys that were in my unit or in units that were close to us. And so because you spend a lot of time with them at work, you know, doing things. We also enjoy doing things off duty time is what we call it. And so one of our big things is we love to play rugby. And so I played rugby the 3 years I was in Germany. But friendships I made with these guys, I still to this day are in touch with. You know, we still get together every couple of years just to hang out and just see what everybody's up to. I mean, most of them are now retired, just like I am. But when we were in the Army, because you come together, you're there for a couple of years, then everybody kind of goes their separate ways and different assignments and stuff like that. But we always kept in touch, you know, phone call, or we'd see somebody, or you know, be like, oh yeah, it's great to see you again, stuff like that. Of course, we didn't have Facebook back then, you know, so you couldn't keep it, you know, couldn't talk to people on Facebook. Now it's a lot easier to keep it up with things. Yeah.
Which one are you?
I'm the one holding the sign on the left again, my big goofy smile. But yeah, so some of my closeness, you know, this guy Tim Martin, Jim Miller, these two are probably two of my closest friends that we still keep in touch with. He's everybody know what a Green Beret is? Special Forces. So he's a colonel in the Special Forces. He's actually fairly high up, and I imagine he'll make general next year. And then Tim, one of my other good friends, he's retired. He's a school teacher. Yeah, he teaches high school and loves it. This is a picture from it's a little blurry, but promotion to lieutenant colonel about 5 years ago. So I'm going to say, does anybody know who this is? Who's that? Cole Burke. So Cole's my stepson. If y'all didn't know. I'm sure you know Mrs. Gill if you recognize her face. So yeah. So this is about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 5 years ago. So 7, 8 years old, I think at the time. I'm sure he'll yell at me. He'll yell at me later for showing y'all that. This is a picture of just our dress-up uniform. So we have a lot of different uniforms. I'm sure you've seen all the soldiers wear their battle dress uniforms, their ACUs, what we call them, Army camouflage uniforms. So this is our dress-up. This is like our tuxedo of uniforms. And so this was something that my wife and I, formal function my wife and I were going to. It just kind of shows you different things that we would wear. Talk about, we lived in different places. This is a picture of us in Hawaii, our family in Hawaii. So you see us, my sister and my brother-in-law. He's in the Air Force, so they were stationed in Hawaii at the same time. So we got to spend a lot of time got to spend a lot of time together. Was there? So that was one of the cooler. I will admit, it was one of the cooler places to live. It's hard not to like Hawaii. Here's a picture. This was us in Iraq. So it wasn't all just wearing fighting. Like I said, most of the time we weren't fighting wars. Most of the time we were helping people. Or we were doing projects and things like this. So we would run. As a kind of a stress reliever. We did a lot of runs. They had a lot of 5Ks and 10Ks. And so this was actually the Army 10 miler. So we just got finished running 10 miles. So that's me. This was only a couple of years ago. So that's start looking at. And then these are guys that worked for me in Iraq. Hawaii. This is a picture of the building that we worked in, and it was basically a double-wide trailer.
Kind of like Mrs. Gill's room now?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. If you took down the wall between her and Mrs. Gill's, that was our office building. All these desks and tables and stuff, we built those. They didn't. So they showed up one day. I mean, this building used to be empty. And we had just like these, the fold-up tables like this. So we would just put all our stuff on the fold-up table so we could start working. And then they just showed up one day with a ton of 4x8 plywood and a saw and said, "Go have fun." And so we had a lot of soldiers who loved to build things, and so they ended up building all that stuff for us. A lot of really smart guys who understood to do that. And this was outside our headquarters. Can y'all read that? Yeah. So past generations forged our freedom, we must sustain it. So it was kind of a salute back to expeditionary forces who'd gone out to help in World War I and World War II, and it was just us saying, "We salute you for doing that because we're doing the same thing." Here's a couple of pictures of vehicles. So this is a big. This vehicle was sent out to find mines or find bombs they buried under roads, and either blow them up or dismantle them. So it's kind of hard to tell because you don't have any because there's no one standing next to it. But this tire right here is probably about this tall. So back here in the rear is, you can see this ladder. So you climb up the ladder and go in the rear right there. And then back here was like they had a gun turret where they put a machine gun up on, stuff like that. But it's a huge vehicle.
Did they have like some sort of bomb disposal unit in Iraq?
Yes. Now there were a lot of bomb disposal units that was their main job, and so this is one of the vehicles they used. So we had a explosive. It's called an explosive ordnance disposal team, and so this is what they rode around in. And so they could use this long arm right here. It would swing out, and so they could work it. And they had like a little video camera that's on the top, on the end of it, so they could use that to help dismantle bombs, or they could go out themselves and do it. Yeah.
If the bombs are buried underground, how would you guys find them?
A lot of times you got to know, so you spend a lot of time in one area. And so you got to kind of know, like when you're driving down a road, you'd always see like, oh yeah, there was a trash can over there. Then all of a sudden, like the next day you drive down, there's like 2 trash cans. Like, well, where did that second trash can come from? A lot of the times soldiers would just see something that looked out of the ordinary, that it's like, hey, this isn't like it's always been, and they would find bombs that way. They'd see wires running off the side of the road, leading off somewhere, and so they'd stop. And so these guys would go down the road like about 5 miles an hour, and there'd be people looking, using binoculars, looking as they go to find.
Mr. Young, don't bring up the lights.
Sure.
Watch your eyes,
Watch your eyes.
Let's see if I can. So anyways, so that's it. I was gonna see. Well, it's kind of hard to see. But anyway, so, you know, kind of wrap it up. You know, I enjoyed serving this country, serving the people of the United States. It was an honor and a privilege to do it. I enjoyed almost every single moment of it. And so, you know, I wouldn't change anything that I did. I loved it. Now just moving on to the next thing. So, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. You need a snack yet?
No, I do need some water though. Thanks.
I think here's another one for you right here.